Spring games yesterday. We had one in Athens, Georgia. Success does a funny thing. It puts trophies on the mantle, but also it brings the more casual spring fan to the table. So at Georgia, this is 2 years in a row now where they've won a national championship. And the reason I mention this is because sometimes you get people to the spring table who normally wouldn't be at the spring table. And that's a good thing. They had a big crowd there yesterday. It's a good thing, but also it means that you have to sort of put on the back of the ticket or put at the bottom of the screen a little asterisk. Hey, not everything taken here should be taken as gospel. Let's apply the proper spring filters, and you're having to teach a lot of people what that's about. There was big news as the game's going on. Well, there was news that I was told was big, and that was Bear Alexander hopping into the transfer portal. It's irrelevant to Georgia. I'm just telling you, you won't care about it by the second week of September. But what was big news is Carson Beck looks like a really good quarterback, which falls in line with what we had expected. But here's why it's big news. It's big news, obviously, because it's the most important position on the team, but also it means we got a clear favorite to start there, which again falls in line with what we expected. But it's one thing to think something. It's another thing to have it validated. And if you have followed the Georgia spring progression closely, if you've been over on Dogs 24/7, for example, and you've been listening to those guys talk, it hasn't been the smoothest of sailing for Carson Beck this spring. It's probably a good thing for him, by the way. He struggled a little bit. He's had some bad practices. I don't think he did overwhelmingly good in the last scrimmage they had. But then he overcame it, looked really good. Looked exceptional for a spring game yesterday. I don't think there's any question right now who's in line to start for them in week one. But as Kirby Smart would tell you, we've got about 25 or 30% of the puzzle figured out. We got summer, we got fall. So I'm giving you my personal opinion there. This is his third year on campus. There are a lot of guys who are about to start across the country for the first time that you need to realize are not true freshmen. And this is the case with Beck. He's been there a couple of years, had poise, very under control. If you watched him yesterday and you didn't know any better, you wouldn't think he was a first-year starter. You would think he's got a lot more experience under his belt. Continuity is important here. Continuity is what I've talked to you about. It's the key word with Georgia this spring in the offense this spring, and that is the fact that even though they lost Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator, they elevated in-house. And this time last year, Dabo Swinney did that, and I didn't think it was a good move. Fast forward a year, Kirby did it, and I think it's going to pay off wonderfully for them. A funny thing happens when you got your roster already largely built the way it needs to be. You don't really have to go out and find a superhero coordinator. You need to look around, preferably in-house, and say, all right, which one of you can just give me more of what I've been getting? And then maybe a little layer of icing in addition on top. That's you, Mike Bobo. Okay, step on up. Carson Beck, familiarity. Don't have to learn anything. Smart is like Saban at this point. He's not going to bring anyone in that changes their verbiage and changes their way of doing things, period. From this point forward, what I'm trying to tell you is coordinators who come in there will learn the Georgia system. Georgia's not hiring someone to come in and teach Georgia their system. That's the breaks when you're a top-level program. They lost A.D. Mitchell to the transfer portal, the wide receiver, and I'm going to talk about him later in the show. They still look really good at receiver. They still look really good there. And pass catcher. I guess I should say pass catcher because you always have to factor tight end there as well. Brock Bowers is back. I know you feel like he's been around forever. He really hasn't. That's the best tight end in the country by my estimation. Some would make an argument pound for pound. The best football player in the country, positional value notwithstanding. But you need to know the other names in that room too. Oscar Delp, for example. Oscar Delp almost took a backwards fall on the sideline yesterday that would have brought his head in direct contact with a bench because that's how far out of bounds he fell. Luckily, we avoided that. But also Lawson Lucky, a really good name, really marketable name. That's a name I just want you to remember. Folks at Georgia already know him, but nationally I try and keep you ahead of the curve. Lawson Lucky. Who is he? Just another four-star tight end Georgia's brought in. Going to be really good. Legacy player, I think, going to be really good. The running back room, if you want me to find a negative with Georgia, it's kind of hard, frankly. But if you want to, I said frankly. We charted my frankly usage last show. Do you realize I said frankly 14 times when we were at Penn State? I don't think it's the head coach's last name. It's just something we got to get better on. I graded out to a C+ 2 shows ago because of frankly. So, honestly, I think they could stand to get more dynamic in the running back room. There you go. Is that a negative? I think they're going to be okay there. I also want you to remember a couple other things. So Cedric Van Pran is the center who's not going to be on the front of any preview magazines. They kept him. He could have gone pro, and they kept him. Massive, huge pickup, even though it's just a keep. But that's a pickup to me. And Tate Ratledge, 2 years ago, they opened the season at Clemson, and he goes down for the year with an injury. Still went to win the national championship, and he played last year. But this is kind of his contract year. He's the right guard, and he now shows no signs of that injury. Whereas last year, if you knew what you were looking at, and by that I mean people qualified to scout offensive line, you probably could have sensed hints of that. You don't get that anymore with him. So they're really good on the interior. It's going to be a weird team this year. Georgia's going to be really weird to follow because on one hand, they may be the best team in the country. On the other hand, their schedule's garbage. It is what it is. And so it's going to be hard to find legitimate ways to talk about them. Clemson's been like this in the past. The ACC schedule does them no favors. They're really good, but they're body bagging everyone, so what do you really say about them? That could be Georgia this year. But they're going to be really good. Best odds right now to win the national championship out of any team in any conference.